Good afternoon again, everyone. We are ready to get started, so we'll just let our audience join us. But as we go throughout the presentation, I'm sure we'll feel free to field questions if you want to post them into the chat, or we can plan to answer them all at the end. But I want to welcome you this afternoon to our Motor Cities Lunch and Learn celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month. My name is Brian Yop. I'm the Deputy Director of Motor Cities National Heritage Area. And we have a great presentation lined up for you today to learn more about our role in celebrating this month and some of the upcoming programming that's going to help us celebrate it long into the future. First, I'm going to give you a little preliminary information about Motor Cities. And we start off by thanking our sponsors, those who continue to support programming just like this, UAW, DT, and Don Nicholson Enterprises for their generous support of Motor Cities. So thank them for helping us with this programming. A reminder that the Motor Cities mission is to preserve and promote, interpret the region's rich automotive and labor heritage and the related economic development while enabling, supporting, and respecting its diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you see here on our slide, our founding partners, the big three automakers, the UAW, and the National Park Service. And you can see here our footprint, just for those who are ever had a question about the Motor Cities National Heritage Area and how much we cover. We are 10,000 square miles in southeast and central Michigan. So as far north as Saginaw, as far west as Kalamazoo, south to Macomb County, south to Monroe, and east into Macomb County. So this covers 16 counties and 6 million residents and counting. So serve as a pretty large heritage area, and we tell those stories across the region. You'll see some recent developments here. You may notice Motor Cities highway signs as you enter and exit that region. So we've been pointed these signs all around the area to let people know that they're entering this special place, the space of historic nature. So you'll see these signs. We have installed about 15 and hope to continue to work with the Michigan Department of Transportation to install more in the coming years. But this just helps people know that they're in a very special place when they touch down and enter this region. A quick plug for future programming while I have your attention early on is that next, in 2 weeks at noon, Motor Cities on the Road, which was previously branded Motor Cities at Home. But guess what? We're out of our homes and for the most part back on the road for certain projects and presentations. So 2 weeks from now, we will hear from the Pontiac Transportation Museum at noon for their presentation, let you know what's going on there. That's on October 26th at noon. So you can register on our website and get that information, and you'll be hearing from Terry Conley in a couple weeks. Also let you know other places that we can connect, and you can find us on the web via our website. Of course, social medias are all here on your screen. So follow us and keep up to date with all the happenings of the Heritage Area, all the events, and of course our weekly e-newsletter, which if you didn't get it, just went out today. So sign up today and make sure you're in the know for our weekly e-newsletter. And of course, you can support the Heritage Area via our membership page and also our donation page via motorcities.org/support. So take a look there in ways that you can continue to support this programming and other programming like it. But today, as we celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month, I want to talk to you about the way it fits into a broader program in the Motor Cities National Heritage Area, which is our Many Voices, One Story programming. The idea is that the Heritage Area tells the story of automobile and labor's influence, and it has been and always will be a story about people, about those who have supported this story throughout the century plus of auto heritage for the many different ways that they have done so. The diversity of people that are represented here, whether it be race, ethnicity, religion, that they all have a space at this table. So it's the many voices that make up the one story of the Heritage Area, and we continue to endeavor to collect those stories as we move forward. Of course, those in the of Latin descent have a very large part, a very large role in that story. So we continue to want to highlight them, which is why we celebrate today. But just to let you know that we are looking for ways to continue to expand and tell the untold stories of all those who have contributed to automotive legacy and automotive history. So as you listen to today's presentation, just think about ways that can be applied in your community or ideas of ways that you can have more stories told. So if the ideas come to your mind, feel free to share, and we'll be happy to work with you in the future, just like we're working on this program today. So today, we're going to kick it off with one of the people who's actually featured here on this slide. So In our Many Voices, One Story sort of continuum, we've actually spoken to Cindy Estrada, who's the vice president of UAW, has held various positions in the organization, is actually just on the edge of getting ready to retire. So we catch her at a key point in her transition. But she is also a third generation Mexican American immigrant here. So her grandparents came here, and then her parents' generation worked here. And now she is taking things to the next level. So we talked to her about a year and a half ago during Women's History Month, primarily focused on that sort of angle of her story of being such a prominent leader, a female leader. But this time we caught up with her and talked to her more about the proud history and background of being of Hispanic descent and how it played a role in the development of her career path, and then what she thinks sort of the future of it is. So I'm going to play some excerpts from that interview, and then we're going to move forward to the second part of our presentation. But right now, let me draw up Cindy. And make sure you can see in here. There we go. You can see, you can hear. So we started off the conversation by asking her about sort of her background. So she's going to walk you through how her family got here and sort of the early influences of her story.
So my grandparents came from Mexico and went through Chicago, and of course, like everyone else, was coming to Detroit for auto jobs or steel jobs. My grandfather actually worked at U.S. Steel, and you know, in the summers they also were farm workers up in the Traverse City area. So the whole family would also do farm work, and all of my uncles, I think with the exception of my father, ended up working in the automotive in GM and in Ford. And then my father was the one who he always wanted, you know, to own his own business. So he started with a pizza. He actually worked at Risden Dairy, which was a union shop. But then after that, he opened up his own pizza place. That didn't last very long, and he opened up a bar on 23rd in Michigan. It was called Leroy's U.S. Star Bar. And so while he didn't work in the plants, it was always filled with workers from, you know, the neighborhood Fleetwood and all of those plants. So yeah. I always say that auto workers sent me to college because they often came in the bar and had lunch and cashed their checks, and it was a pretty lively place in those days.
Yeah. So in Cindy sharing that, I think that kind of captures the spirit sometimes of what we talk about, the influence of automotive in our communities, that it's not just the plant, it's not just the workers, but it's all the community that's affected by that. Or in her story, though, her uncles worked directly with auto, even steel, and then into auto. Her father was the owner of a proprietor of this space, but it shows you the influence when she jokes about auto workers putting her through college. But we went on to talk about what happened as that community evolved. You know, she'll share more about that story.
We always find that there's like the communities around those plants are really a lot of the stories, a lot of the bars and the restaurants have the real insight and the real stories. So you mentioned your uncles, and I wanted to ask about their involvement in the Latin American Council for Labor Advancement. Were they engaged early on with that?
So my uncle Joe Estrada and John Estrada were both members of LACLA in Detroit. And my Uncle Joe was actually the president. And that was the way I got involved in the labor movement, through my uncle, well, through the bar, I always say, because there were tons of union members that came in there, non-union and union. And but my uncle had always encouraged me to go work with the farm workers out in California when I was in college, and to organize, and got me involved in LACLA at a young age. And you know, it really was because I'm half Mexican and I'm half Polish. And so my uncle really taught me a lot about our past, about the struggles that we were in, you know, Latinos in general, whether it be housing or whether it be voting rights or whether it be union organizing, activism. And so he really was a huge influence in LACLA and for Latinos in general, because we knew there was a place where we could come together and take on issue fights. And have community.
Sure. No, that's
So as she learned from her uncles and was encouraged to work in union organizing, she is going to talk about how she moved from there and went out west to work with the farm workers, and that gave her a valuable experience that led her back to Michigan and back to sort of a position that maybe launched her into her career in organized labor on this side, especially with the automotive, and that's working with Mexican industry since I get to that point.
That's beautiful. I want to get into Mexican industries and that
even before
process.
Mexican industries, like I had gone out to the farm workers and I was helping organize, so I already knew that that was going to be, that was my passion. I found a job that was not a job. It was like a way of life. And so when I came back, I started working in a UAW shop. I was actually going to teach, in the city of Detroit, but quickly, because of my organizing experience and Spanish-speaking skills, the UAW had pulled me out as a temporary organizer to organize Mexican industries. And it was at a time where we were already starting to see, my dad's bar, again, I say I went to college because of all the people that came in there in the business, but you saw what happened to the whole community as plants started closing, like Fleetwood. I mean, it's not just about workers losing their jobs, but it's the devastation of the whole community. At that time, parts plants were coming up, and they were making substantially less money. And Mexican industries in particular was mostly, Latina women, and, they were, they were sewing and they were doing very difficult work. They gave a lot of carpal tunnel. They weren't getting paid good wages, and so they had started to reach out to the UAW, and that's how I got involved, because I spoke Spanish and had a little bit of organizing experience. And that campaign just was incredible in the way that community came together, workers in the plant, and the first time we lost, because I think people were too afraid to come forward and act like a union. The second time I believe we won is because those same workers who gave the company another chance realized that nothing was going to change without a contract. And so they were very active, very public, very engaged. It was their campaign, and they were running it. And they were amazing, the women on that campaign.
So this becomes a very familiar sort of labor organizing story where you can replace Mexican industries with any number of companies and organizations around the country and the world that UAW has fought to represent over the years, and sort of see that similar story of the original fight to organize, the hesitance at first, or the friction that you run into. And then, as she admitted, they even failed in their original organizing campaign there before ultimately succeeding when the people came together with sort of a mind to work. So when that company representing sort of the influence of union and organizing there, but there also came a sharp turn. We asked her about when that was, which was in the late 90s, around 2000, but it came a sharp turn in the constitution of Southwest Detroit's auto industry as plants started to close. And so we asked her about the impact of that on that community.
Touched on this, the impact of that on Southwest Detroit's community.
I mean, you could just see it was devastating, right? I mean, one, you saw it in my dad's business. I mean, people just stopped coming in because, they weren't working down the road and having lunch or getting together. And so you saw it in all the businesses down there, right? Plants close, people move out. And then you also saw sort of these parts plants that were, to have a good job, like a big 3 job and making really good money. There was a different kind of life in the parts plants. They were making half of what a big 3 worker was making. The companies were really driving down wages, and I think it was worse in Southwest Detroit because, you have a lot of Latino workers, many who were undocumented, many women, and while Hank Aguirre was running, was the owner of that plant after he passed away, the dynamics sort of changed with his children, and and I believe the conditions were even worse because of the fear that workers had of not having documents, some of them. And, it was close to home, a good, a place to work, but the conditions just rapidly deteriorated. There will be.
Oh, so it's a familiar story when we think about our auto communities around the state. So a story of what could have happened or did happen in Lansing for a period of time, Bob, or Flint, the same thing when plants closed, the effect of the community around that plant, and particularly on those who are really dependent on that labor work. And she talks about Latino workers being, undocumented, or in some cases, women who in generations were not positioned in the workforce as properly as they should have been. So they were in a very vulnerable spot. So I think it's a story that resonates around our heritage area, of one that, you know, could have impacted any of our major automotive cities, and has, I think, across the board. So we all see the ripple effects of that. But, you know, just one more excerpt I'm going to play for this. And by the way, the entire interview is going to be available on our YouTube page. And so couple that with the one we did, search for the one we did with her last March of 2021, and then it kind of follows up with this one to kind of hear the whole story. But I'm going to wrap it up, her section of this, with a question we had about the future of Latinx workers in the auto industry, and at least her perspective on it, and it takes off from here.
Because I think one of the things that I'm seeing, especially with young Latino workers, or Latinx, we say now, you know, they're engaged, they're active. You know, I think that the whole movement of DACA has really inspired young people. And so I think the out of control wealth in the country, you know, when you have 10 billionaires that went from 700 billion to 2 trillion during a pandemic, while the rest of, especially Latino workers, went deeper into poverty, I think the younger generation and others are starting to say enough is enough. And so they're willing to take more risks in changing that dynamic because their family's, you know, future depends on it.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So there's Cindy's take on that, and like I said, we're going to share the remainder of the video, or the entirety of the video, on our YouTube channel after this presentation. So you're the first to sort of hear that. But I think her perspective as she retires, having seen so much in her career and seeing the evolution of this, is, you know, really valuable, and it ties into our conversation today about the impact and influence of Latinos in the city of Detroit and beyond. You know, from other cities, we're talking about our region, but later on we'll talk about the city of Detroit. The impact and the role of them, and how we are recognizing the accomplishments, the people, and the places, and the ideas that sort of made their communities what they were, what we're doing here today. And one of the ways we're going to be doing it for Motor Cities is yet another quickie preview. I'm going to share some materials here on our Southwest Detroit Auto Heritage Guide. So this website, as some of you have heard about it, developed for some time, but we are pretty close to the finishing touches on what will help to sort of tell the story of the legacy, as this byline says, the legacy of the automotive entrepreneurs, the workers and businesses and the unions of the neighborhood that built the car, and the way the car built the neighborhood. I think there's no other place more sort of emblematic of that in Southwest Detroit, because of the concentration, because of the impact, because of the diversity of cultures that blended there around the auto industry. You know, it's been described as sort of our Ellis Island, as far as those who arrived in this area and launched off from the famed Michigan train station and went off to find their fortune, or to establish themselves, you know, in the new middle class. So the website will focus on all of that. It will be divided up into these buckets that kind of help to tell the story. Firms and sites and community history and labor roots will be a big part of that. So we'll hear more about the union story. You ought to know more about some other places of interest, as you'll hear more about the places which were around these plants. So not just the factories, but the places. But if you went into a sub page like Firms and Sites, you would see it organized, so you could learn more about maybe it's the geography up and down major highways, or maybe it's a big anchor site like the Lincoln Motor Car Company that would tell their entire story here. But we'll be able to dive into more about what made this area so active and so significant, like she's describing. But we look forward to that. A little kind of sneaky preview here. Ron Alpern from the team is on the call. We may hear from Ron a little later, but hold tight, Ron. But we may hear a little later. But I just wanted to share those slides with you to say that this story of Latino workers in Southwest Detroit is dominant, but Southwest Detroit really represents actually a huge blend of many different cultures. So we'll be celebrating that site when it goes live a little bit down the road. But I want to hand over the presentation now to another friend of ours. Ryan Schumacher is joining us from the City of Detroit's Historic District Advisory Board. And Ryan is going to share with us some specific programming that's come together from a mutual friend of ours, which is the National Park Service, and a project that's going to launch here in the city of Detroit to help support the Latino community. So Ryan, take it away.
Thank you. And I'll apologize to everybody ahead of time. I have a 5-year-old at home that's coughing. So if you hear coughing in the background, that's what's going on. So thanks for the welcome. I'm Brian Shoemaker with the Historic Designation Advisory Board with the City of Detroit. I'm here to talk about the underrepresented community grant that the National Park Service provides, that has been providing for the past few years. We have been awarded 2 of these grants over the past couple of years. One for which I'm going to specifically talk about today is the Latinx Community Historic Context Grant project, and then we also in this past year we're also awarded one for the Arab American community along the same lines of developing a historic context for that community as well. Oops, let's see if we can go. There we go. So our board generally is on the city council side of things and city government. We are tasked with designating historic properties and districts locally as a local historic district, but also we do National Register nominations. We answer questions related to preservation related issues and topics for the council, as well as we are the certified local government representatives for the city. So we have done many projects over the past 20 years of us being a CLG, doing rehab work on Belle Isle, to the Paquette plant, helping them out with a variety of projects, doing educational materials and stuff like that. So that's kind of the breadth of what we're doing. But this specific grant is relatively new in the grand scheme of things. And I'll go into, so the purpose of the grant itself is to the National Park Service several years ago determined that out of all the National Register nominations, the thousands and thousands of National Register nominations that were already listed, the representation for underrepresented communities, so communities of color, it was severely lacking. And in order to bolster those numbers or attempt to start pegging away at getting those numbers up, the National Park Service created a category of grant programs for the underrepresented communities to focus on that. So the point of the grant is to list additional properties that are connected to those stories on the National Register. As part of our project, we proposed that in addition to doing that, we would do a larger historic context for the Latinx community in Detroit. So looking at it holistically, developing themes and a context that could be used not only for this project and for the whatever nomination we identify or whatever building or site we identify that we want to put up for the National Register nomination, it would allow others to use that context and then list more properties using that context so that it creates a less of a heavy lift to get things listed on the National Register. As it goes right now, we were awarded back in August of 2021. We had some procurement issues as far as getting people to bid on it. So we are in the final stages of getting a contract approved for a consultant to do this work, to help us do this work. So we're hoping to kick off everything in earnest and do community engagement starting in the new year. We're going to be onboarding the consultant, getting them kind of up to date on where we're at. But this project will, it says August 2023, but it'll probably end up going through 2024. It's a pretty big project, and with the delays due to COVID and all that, that's kind of the timeline we're looking at. So we'll probably finish up in late 2024. And like I said, the grant entails the identification of historic properties that are related to that context. So we're going to identify sites throughout the city, and part of that project is we are going to be doing a lot of community outreach. We plan on putting together like a subcommittee of stakeholders to help us kind of go through proposed lists of properties that we should be looking at as far as connection to the Latinx history. So from that committee, they will decide on, I think we had settled on 40 to 50 properties where we would actually survey at a reconnaissance level, which means just kind of quick photos, do a brief history, doing an inventory form, a historic inventory form for those properties. And then 10 of those would get a more intensive deep dive into the history and the significance of the properties. And then out of those 10, one would be selected for this project in particular, to be listed on the National Register. Hold on a minute. So that's kind of the way that things will roll out. And then also on top of that, we will be doing a multiple property documentation form, which is kind of the template for creating the historic context, so that others can come after that and use it to list other properties on the National Register. Oops. Moving forward also is going to be kind of determining the study area boundaries. So that's where community engagement and stakeholder engagement is going to come in key. Like, what is the breadth of what we're going to be looking at? As far as geographic area, like we know the majority of properties are going to be in southwest Detroit. And but we will be looking at and considering properties that may not be in that area that are significant to that history. The types of sites we're going to be identifying are churches, community areas, public spaces, schools, murals, commercial properties, parks, pretty much anything, the built landscape, to identify those sites that might be significant and would be eligible for listing on the National Register. And finally, like, we want to hear the stories from stakeholders and from community members. That's going to be a large chunk of this project, is doing oral histories and collecting that. And in a way where we're going to do that, like, we're going to be, as a result of this project, we do want to translate everything into Spanish as well, so it's easily shareable and everybody can read it. We don't want to, we want to kind of diversify how we communicate with people, so communications will be bilingual as well. And we're going to be working with a consultant to kind of go through that and making sure that we're being mindful of, because I know getting history out of people isn't just asking questions, it's getting people comfortable with things. So, but I think that's it. This is just kind of like the way that we're working as an office. We're working towards equity. A major priority for our office is to make sure that we diversify the listings that we have, that we're doing going forward, and representing those communities that have been traditionally underrepresented in the National Register and in histories in general. One project that we just finished up for using the URC grant was the 8 Mile Wyoming project, which was an African-American community that like from the ground up built that community up. And so that was an interesting story. We collected a lot of oral histories, and that resulted in a context for that area. And we also did an intensive level survey there. But yeah, like, going forward, our office is very focused on bringing diversity to the profession, but also to the work that we're doing. So I think that's it.
Well, thank you. It's great, great information to hear, and sort of the direction of the project that fits into our discussion today. So we look forward to being of help to you in whatever way we all can to help, ferret out these stories and these sites. I think, like, some of the things that Cindy shared are exemplary of the sort of sites you'll uncover. These places that were really connected to the locations. Bob, I think of Harry's place up in Lansing, and I say, okay, you got a bar or restaurant right across the street from a plant. Imagine the stories that were told. Imagine the memories that were made at these locations. So I can't imagine how it wouldn't, as we uncover this stuff, would not tie into the automotive history of the region. So we look forward again to working with you, and that's why when sharing earlier the Southwest Detroit Guide, Ron, I wanted to throw this out there because it seems like the connective tissue between that sort of project, the Southwest Detroit Guide, developing, looks at the historic sites of that area, and then the work that Ryan's going to do with the city, only, kind of serves us to shine a brighter light on all of these efforts. So maybe, Ron, do you have any additional perspective on the work that you're working on with the Southwest Detroit Guide and how you want it to go?
Yeah, thank you, Brian. I think the most important thing that the volunteers who have been working on this project over the years have felt is that we had the means to document what Brian has already showed you, the businesses and the labor story. And we used to regard this as two legs of a three-legged stool. Trying to tell the story of all the cultural communities that make up the Southwest Detroit mosaic was something that was largely beyond our ability to do that, because by and large, we would end up with older activists or historians, whatever, talking about a community where they have friends and colleagues, but it's not the same thing as engaging that community. And what we envision is once the website is launched, we're going to be making appeals to stakeholders in various communities about how we can collaborate together to shape a narrative that will be posted to the Auto Heritage Guide that is narrower than what Ryan's scope is, but it's right on target with what Brian's aspirations are. We want to tell the specific auto story of Southwest Detroit. And one of my favorite examples is when in the 1980s, I started on some of this work. We were really fortunate to interview Jose Alfaro, who was at that time the head of a social service agency in Southwest Detroit and really one of the elders of that community. Well, it turns out in the 1930s, he was 9 years old and was invited to dance for Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo while they were in Detroit working on the DIA murals. And he had specific recollections of that period of time that were, he went down to the train station, I guess, and watched people go on those trains for the forced repatriation back to Mexico. But he knew that Rivera was donating money from his commission at the DIA to make sure that the women and children on that train were going to be fed going back to Mexico. That's one take on a very complicated story about the repatriation. And that's not necessarily the focus of what Ryan's work is going to be. And we're not going to necessarily be the definitive source of a discussion about the repatriation, but it is certainly an important story to be incorporated into a website that wants to talk about the people of Southwest Detroit. We have different opportunities to talk about the African-American history in Southwest Detroit or Arab-American history in Southwest Detroit, Maltese history and whatever. But what we envision is a series of alliances with community leaders and activists to help us shape that narrative. And anybody who's interested in this, just contact Brian and he'll pass on information to me about how I can explain our approach to this. We could benefit from more volunteers. We can benefit from more institutional sponsors. But this definitely is the next step to round out the Auto Heritage Guide that Brian has introduced to folks today.
Yeah. Okay.
And we look forward to working with Ryan on this. We see this as a partnership where we need as many people engaged in the process as possible to make it really work.
Yeah. No, we amplify the voices together. So we're glad to be working on all of this and appreciate you giving that feedback. So if anyone else on the call has any questions or comments or observations for us, we're here to share or offer any feedback. Yes, Bob.
Yeah, I was just wondering where the geographical location of this area is. The boundary lines of it. I saw the star on it, but I was curious. Is
So
that-
we have not determined a boundary yet. That's going to be part of the public engagement of like what the community believes the boundary is and coming to some consensus about what that boundary is, because we're not going to come in and tell one of the biggest mistakes some people do is they come in and tell is like, this is what we defined as the boundary. So we know it's not everybody's going to agree on something, but getting kind of a rough approximation of what Southwest Detroit looks like, what most people think it is, and it's more to give us more of a focus on where to look for resources and stuff like that. And like I said, we're not beholden to just looking in there. If people come forward and like, hey, there's a place on 7 Mile that is significant to Latinx history in Detroit, we're not going to dismiss it because it's not in the area. We're still going to take a look at it, but it's kind of like giving some focus to a limited amount of like resources that we have to do the project. So yeah.
I think that area wasn't that where the fort was, in that area around Clark Street?
Yes.
But that
Yeah.
would include the old fort that existed there, which
Right.
now is Spanish.
Definitely, yeah.
If I may, what's really interesting, Robert, is that a lot of people recognize Mexican Town now by some of those boundaries that the Fisher Freeway divided that community. And it's only in the last couple of years that there's a pedestrian bridge that reunites Bagley Avenue that for 40 years had been separated by the freeways. But generally, Michigan Avenue, Bagley are the heart along Verner Highway going west to Springwells is what is a very heavy concentration of Mexican
Yeah,
owned businesses and community centers these days. This is all very temporal. I mean, you go back to the 1920s, there's maps that show the much smaller enclaves in that same area. And what one of the community historians that I was meeting with back in July told me, and I'm looking forward to having this conversation with Ryan, was that before any of the freeways were built, he argued that there were city designated maps that indicated that Mexican Town was anything west of 14th Street below Michigan Avenue. And so there's just a lot of hard work that needs to be done here to try and sort this out for the benefit of researchers, but also to make the story sort of accessible to younger generations who aren't going to spend all the time in the deep weeds looking at that. But that's one way to think about it, Robert, if that helps you.
Yes, thank you very much. I had another question for Brian. He was talking about trying to boil it down to maybe 10 historical buildings. I think that's to qualify.
So for the focus of the grant, we're mirroring it off of the State Historic Preservation Office did a similar grant for civil rights in the 20th century, and they structured it very similarly, where there was a committee of people that kind of determined what was going to get closely looked at, and then what was going to looked at even with a finer tooth comb. That's not to say that it doesn't mean any of the things that aren't identified as getting that deeper dive aren't significant. It's just kind of we're trying to triage the funding that we have through the grant and the capacity that we have to focus on those. And I will say, for the most part, we're trying to focus on things that might be negatively impacted by something or might be threatened, that there might be a loss coming down the road, so that we can document those histories before something negative happens to those resources. So that will be part of what kind of gets determined as far as the priorities. But yeah, like I don't want to put like this is more important than that for that list. But it's just kind of like we're trying to do the best we can with the resources that we have. And that's not to say that like in future grant rounds we can apply if there's enough community like support, we could apply for other grants to further that work and do more in-depth research on those additional properties as they come up. So
Thank you.
It's
I
always,
noticed, as my wife used to work for the highway department, and case in point, what Ron was talking about, talking to community people, they were going to tear this house down in Escanaba. And at the meeting, at the public hearing, because the highway department had these public hearings, say this is where the road's going and we're going to tear it. Somebody stood up and said, no, you can't tear that down. It's a historical site. It was used by the Underground Railroad. And nobody knew that, but it was true. So they had to change the route of the road. So it's going to be interesting what you find. Thank you very much.
be a journey. No, thanks, Robert. We've seen that so many times, and that's just with the automotive story. So imagine how many, as you say, go back centuries on some of the history that we'll unearth. So it's gonna be an interesting ride. Okay. Any other questions? If not, we can wrap it up, and our lunch and learn will be complete. I hope you lunched while you learned. I did not. I have to get a sandwich right after this, but just a reminder too that again, join us in a couple of weeks for Motor Cities on the Road with the Pontiac Transportation Museum. Excited to share about the developments really from going from 0 to 60, to borrow sort of automotive phrase there, going from 0 to 60 as far as what they built at the museum and where they're going with it. So it's an exciting time for them. So we look forward to hearing from them in a couple of weeks. And as Ryan said, we are available for questions or thoughts and input. Stay tuned for how this whole project rolls out in the immediate future with the HDAB, and also with more information about the Southwest Detroit Auto Heritage Guide, as both those things will be coming along and be running in some cases parallel, in some cases they'll be crossing over each other. So we'll be looking forward to working on a lot of that stuff. And later today, we will have our Cindy Estrada full interview up on our YouTube page to share with everyone as well. So, all right. Well, everyone, I'll thank you for joining us, and we will see you in a couple of weeks for Motor Cities on the Road.
Thank you very much.